So I learned, so you're an extension research, and I watched your video, and I learned that your motto is giving cows a voice through science.
Yes.
I thought that was really good. Do you have publishing plans in the year ahead? Earn serious savings on article charges and put more funds back into your research budget with the Journal of Dairy Science and JDS Communications Loyalty Program. Reviewers and corresponding authors earn points towards discounted article publishing charges. Visit adsa.org to learn more. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Dairy Digressions podcast. I am Dr. Matt Lucy, and I will be your host. We're recording today from the 47th Discover Conference of the American Dairy Science Association, focused on dairy, cow, and farm resilience. ADSA Discover Conferences bring together the top minds in the dairy industry. Today in the podcast, we have Jennifer Van Oss, who is an associate professor and extension specialist in animal welfare on the faculty of the Department of Animal Sciences at the University of Wisconsin. Dr. Van Oss earned a BA in psychology in 2004 from Harvard University, where she conducted original research on memory and aging in humans. After gaining 6 years of professional business experience, Dr. Van Oss attended graduate school at the University of California, Davis, and received a PhD in interdisciplinary animal behavior graduate program. She then conducted postdoctoral research in the Department of Animal Science at UC Davis and in the animal welfare program at the University of British Columbia, Canada, and finally joined the faculty of UW-Madison in 2018. The research in her lab at Madison focuses on understanding, evaluating, and improving the welfare of dairy animals from biological and social sciences perspectives. The goal of Dr. Van Oss's extension program is to promote best practices in management and housing to help the dairy industry adapt as our scientific knowledge about animal welfare continues to grow. She is a spring 2025 recipient of the prestigious Extension Award from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I'd just like to say, welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here.
It is fantastic to be here. You know, we got to get one thing done right away, right? This name Van Oss. Fascinating. Okay. Comes from what side of the family?
So this is my married name.
Okay.
And it is Dutch. And I think that the Dutch would probably tell us to say it more like Van Oss.
Ah.
But the reason I love this name is that Oss is a town in the Netherlands, but it also means ox.
Yeah.
So for a dairy scientist, it's perfect. So I thank my husband and his Dutch side of the family for that.
Yeah, and we are a travel show. And if you go to the city of Oss, you'll see a gigantic, New Age statue of an ox. What's that, right?
Yeah.
In the Netherlands. And I thought to myself, that explains everything about you. You are Dutch. It explains the dairy link. You don't need to explain yourself. Well, your husband's side of the family.
I'm honorary Dutch.
You're
yes.
honorary Dutch. Well, it's good enough. I am not honorary Dutch. I don't have it. And so that is fantastic. I looked that up, and it's fantastic that you knew that.
Yes, and also our daughter was born in the year of the ox, according to the Chinese zodiac calendar. Yeah, so we have a lot of cow references in our family.
I saw you brought a picture to your daughter to the conference. Competitive cuteness going on at of the children at this conference, but that's just where we are in the dairy industry. Okay, we are friends, and we're among friends, and we enjoy each other's company, and it is a community. And today you are talking about understanding and improving animal welfare for the resilience of the dairy industry, and of course it was a brilliant talk.
Thank you.
Well presented. I enjoyed it to no end, and both talks this morning that I attended were phenomenal. So yeah, I just heard during the preliminary conversations you're from Champaign, Urbana.
That's right.
And for some reason, we must have just talked before, because your parents were faculty members there. Did I hear that somewhere?
Yes, my parents were both professors of geology. So for a couple decades, their offices were across the hall from each other. They had lunch together. And it was a great place to grow up. And I think that's what really sparked my scientific curiosity, but also gave me exposure to dairy cattle, it being a land-grant university.
Yeah, that there, and University of Illinois has a really great dairy tradition. There's a dairy herd just off campus, or maybe on campus,
on the corner of campus.
On the corner, and beautiful dairy herd there. If you ever had a chance to visit, University of Illinois is a great institution, great botanical gardens there as well, right at the edge of campus. It's quite beautiful. So you decided to go to Harvard, which is an interesting, congratulations to you.
Thank you.
And your undergraduate major you mentioned was psychology?
Yes.
And you did research on aging in humans.
Yeah, so I started having an interest in research in the biological sciences in high school. So I went to University of Illinois Laboratory High School on campus at UIUC. So my route to get to school actually took me past that UIUC Dairy Research Farm, which actually I'd visited in elementary school as a Girl Scout, and I thought cows were just so beautiful. I asked if we could ride them. The answer was no at that time. But my parents were scientists. I didn't really take to geology, but I loved biology and psychology. So in high school, I got hired as a paid high school research assistant.
Oh, fantastic.
By Dr. Kelly Tappenden, who worked on human nutrition. And she used piglets and rats, I believe, as models for human small intestine function. So I was, just doing basic chemical inventory, lab safety kind of stuff. But that kind of gave me this exposure to being involved in the scientific process, and also some questions around animal research and how people perceive that and its utility for benefiting humans and other animals. And then as an undergraduate, I tried to balance, do I want to be a biology major, a psychology major, and I decided to major in psychology. And I really wanted to get involved in research more firsthand. So originally I worked with a PhD student, Amy Weissman, who was in the lab of Dr. Daniel Schachter, who's a famous memory researcher. So he's written some popular science books about memory and aging. And then for my senior honors thesis, I started working with Dr. Andrew Budson, who was a neurologist, an MD at Brigham and Women's Hospital. And he treated me like a master's student. I had a huge amount of independence, and that thesis ended up getting published. I was second author, but that really sparked my interest in doing science and feeling like I could do it, but I didn't want to go to grad school at that.
I tried, so now I know why I couldn't find that, because I was trying to find that paper.
And I was not yet Van Oss. I was not married, as an undergrad.
Now I know why I couldn't find that paper, because I was really looking for it, and because I figured there might have been a paper that came out.
Yes, if you look at my orchid, you'll find it. So people, when I got married and I changed my last name, people were traumatized. They were like, how could you? You've published already under Chen. And but that's why we have our researcher identifiers, and Van Oss, it's a much more unique name. So I think it's easier to find my research now, although there is another Jennifer Van Oss.
No way, but you've got like a million little letters.
But her H index is way higher than mine. And she studies, in part, human heat stress.
No way.
So even the AIs, these systems that try to tell you, we think you published a new paper, they always show me her papers because she's so prolific. But I squatted on jennifervanoss.com first. So I've got that brand recognition.
You've got that brand. Okay, so, well, I thought that was, because that explains that. Because I was like looking. I was stalking images. Okay,
Should
Jennifer,
I be worried?
No, Jennifer Van Oss, Harvard. Let's get an undergraduate picture here. Couldn't find anything, and I couldn't find that paper.
It's very reassuring to know I'm stalker-proof.
Yeah, you're stalker-proof.
So when I was an undergraduate majoring in psychology, as a sophomore, we had the sophomore seminar where we had to write a literature review. So all semester long, we worked on it. And I was always curious about mental illnesses or these degenerative cognitive issues. And I always wondered, if you start to develop a cognitive or mental issue, how aware are you about that? And is that upsetting? It was something that I worried about. So for my sophomore seminar paper, I wrote about schizophrenia and this concept called anosognosia. And it's about your lack of awareness of your own cognitive deficits or mental illness.
That's awesome.
So I wrote this literature review about anosognosia and schizophrenia. And then I took that concept and applied it to Alzheimer's. So when I started working with Dr. Budson, he had ongoing research about memory function in Alzheimer's patients. And I wanted to compare the patient's own perceptions of their cognitive decline with the assessments by their caregivers, so usually their family members. So by looking at the discrepancy between your self-assessment and your caregiver's assessment, you can calculate an anosognosia score, so the degree of awareness.
Yes.
And then we related that to their memory performance, but not just simple forgetting, but actually the formation of false memories. So you think you remember things that didn't really happen. There's ways you can devise simple cognitive tests, and then looking at strategies to try to overcome that. So it's the field of metacognition. It sounds very esoteric. I learned so much from doing that. And there our findings were a little surprising, were those who had started progression into Alzheimer's, but were still early enough along to not, to have some function. We found that the more aware they were of their deficits, actually the worse they performed in these false memory tests, because those who were less aware actually were overconfident, and somehow they were able to employ some heuristics to avoid the false memories. It was very surprising.
This, it's so interesting what you just discussed, and I think it's a great example of how in the dairy sciences we need people with all sorts of previous training and previous experiences. It makes it really powerful, because I listen to that and I just say, oh, this is perfect for a dairy welfare person, because we're going to talk about it eventually, but I'm just so fascinated by, animal cognition and what animals understand and behavioral aspects of that. And I think that just feeds, not that cows have Alzheimer's, we wouldn't know if they had, I don't know, maybe we would, but we're going to talk about that too.
Okay.
We're going to talk about all that stuff. But you have to be patient, Jennifer. We're going to get there. Okay.
Well, I'm going to interject though, because part of what that experience taught me was about how to conduct scientific research, and that I really carried with me, but it also taught me what kind of scientist I wanted to be. And that's actually why I didn't go to grad school at the time, because I found it fascinating. I learned a lot, but I realized in my heart of hearts that I'm an applied researcher, and I didn't want to continue on that line about metacognition. And that's indirectly what led me to where I am today, where the research I do is extremely applied. I do it by collaborating with dairy farmers and with the industry, because I want to make sure I'm solving their problems. Not, the work that those labs were doing also has practical aspects, but that's not what I was doing at the time. So I needed to take a break and collect myself. I also get asked a lot of the times, does your psychology bachelor's degree directly affect your work now in terms of asking these questions of animals? And at first I would say for the first few years, no, very indirectly. But now that I'm doing more social science research with people like dairy farmers, I think that's where a lot of those techniques overlap. Like that assessment I had to do, comparing the caregiver's perceptions to those of the patients themselves, that is a lot more directly relevant to what I do now, looking at what the public versus the industry thinks about animal welfare issues.
Yeah, your talk here was super revealing about that, and I'm not sure we're going to have time to be able to redissect all that sort of stuff. If we do at the end, we should probably revisit that. I was, because it was quite revealing, a little bit unexpected, some of the results, I think. Wouldn't you say? A little
unexpected, but in a good way. So some of this work we did comparing the industry and public perceptions, we actually found pretty good alignment, which I think is an optimistic story for the industry. Well,
we might as well just quickly. Okay. I'll give you a couple minutes to summarize what you talked about here, because I did have a question, but I didn't ask it.
Okay. So I was in the section about farmer and industry resilience, so not animal resilience. So I didn't actually talk about direct animal welfare research, asking cows, what do you need to experience good welfare? It was more about asking people, how do we maintain this idea of what we're calling public legitimacy, so public trust or social license. And so mainly what I discussed was part of a U.S. Department of Agriculture funded grant where they were explicitly looking for people to do social science research to understand how can we build and maintain trust with the public, including potential dairy consumers, in animal agriculture practices, because sometimes they are contentious and potential consumers may get turned off. So how do we bring them into this equation and try to bridge this gap between the industry and then non-farming people. And so a couple of the things we found, we were focusing specifically on the context of routine cow handling that happens day to day on every dairy farm as just a snapshot of what do people in the industry think about these various probably commonplace practices versus what does the public think? And we found that the public and the industry were more aligned than we expected. So generally they agreed on what practices are acceptable versus unacceptable, which lines up with previous animal welfare research based on our understanding of how cows would actually respond to those practices. The other optimistic finding we discovered was that people in the public generally thought that the practices that were less acceptable, so the worst practices, they assumed they were less common. So they did not generally think that these unacceptable practices were rampant in the industry. So that's good news. Although we did identify some areas for potential improvement were sort of these medium or gray area negative practices that aren't extreme. Those are probably more commonplace than we'd like. So that to us is an opportunity for training or education of workers in the dairy industry to reiterate those good animal handling practices. The other thing we found was we asked just more generically about if we had training programs for dairy employees to teach them these appropriate practices, what would consumers, and I say consumers because these were people who said that they actually consume dairy products, what do they think of that kind of program? What would they think of a dairy company that launched this kind of initiative to potentially help cows? And we found that people recognize that a company would probably do it for strategic reasons, as a marketing exercise. But they also thought that they were doing it for altruistic reasons, so to truly help the cows and the people who work with them, and that people who felt more strongly that it was being done for these altruistic reasons had an even more positive perception of that dairy company, which on average was already positive to begin with. And so that was also an interesting finding. I think we need to do a lot more work because it was just one scenario that we proposed, but I thought that that was promising because it suggests that if people are aware that the dairy industry is proactively doing these things to help animals, even if they assume it's also for strategic reasons, business reasons, that's okay.
It was quite revealing. And the question I wanted to ask you was at these times in America, there's tremendous polarization with respect to political philosophies and the direction to take America. And does that track with any of these attitudes towards animal handling or how we care for animals? Or is that that's politics? And then this is a completely different sphere, for example. Does any of that stuff track?
I get what you're getting at. And yes, that is something we examined in both of these studies, but I didn't present it today. So for the second study about their perceptions of this hypothetical program, you're going to have to wait till the ADSA meeting where I present those. But for the first study that is published, where we showed people these video clips of the handling, yes, we did evaluate associations with these socio-demographic variables. So where you fall on the political spectrum, self-reported. And we didn't label the political parties. We just said, if you consider this linear spectrum, are you more conservative, more liberal? How do you self-identify? We asked about gender, educational attainment, income. Did you mostly grow up in a rural area or in an urban setting or suburban? How often do you purchase dairy products? And we did find associations with some of these demographic variables that replicate what have been found in previous studies, even outside of dairy, that people who tend to affiliate in a certain direction have more positive or negative perceptions of issues like animal welfare or other social issues.
We do have the annual meeting, the American Dairy Science Association, and the 2026 meeting is in Milwaukee.
I saw that. Very convenient.
Yeah, and it's June 21 to 24. And we're going to talk about your time at University of California, Davis. I assume that was with Cassandra Tucker.
That's right, yeah.
And then at UBC, of course, with Nina and Dan. Yes. And we just use, Nina's kind of like Madonna, like they don't have last names, Nina.
Yes, exactly. Enough said.
Nina, and everybody, if you don't know who Nina is, put it, I don't know, ADSA at adsa.org and make a comment like I have no clue who Nina was.
Nina von Kaiserlink. MAG von Kaiserlink on publications, though. She was in that first cohort of the JDS 100 authors, I remember.
Oh, yeah. So I know that your current position at Wisconsin, and the most important thing about this Wisconsin position is your office is right next to Paul Fricke's.
That's right. We're next door neighbors.
Can you believe it? What? How did you work that?
It's the extension. Well, traditionally it was the extension hall. And actually, I don't know if you know, but my current office was Randy Shaver's old office.
Oh, wow.
And I like to talk about this because it reminds me that I've got these shoes to fill where he was so well known as an extension specialist with these strong relationships with the dairy farmers in the industry.
Yeah.
So he's a role model of mine. Well,
seems like Fricke everybody knows Fricke. And if you don't know Fricke, somebody you know knows Fricke.
Yes, and Paul Fricke was a member of my faculty mentoring committee, and I remember on day one, he said, you need to have a proactive research and extension program. So I always have the little Paul Fricke on my shoulder telling me, be proactive.
Be proactive. And so you do have a research and extension program, and you are right next to Dr. Fricke, and I did view some of your videos. I was very impressed. I noticed your training video. So creative, that training video on Moving Cows. It's kind of a video game. How in the world did you make that? Okay, so to explain the Moving Cows training video and how that all came about, because that's kind of part of your extension.
It is. It's a huge part of my extension. So Moving Cows, Mooving, there's a cow pun in there. It's a video game, and it's a free app that anyone can download, whether they're an Apple user or an Android user. Just look in your Play Store. And we designed this to be an free educational resource for people who work on dairy farms to fulfill some industry expectations that anybody who works with cattle needs to have an annual refresher on best practices for cow handling. And I guess two things. I never expected to be a video game designer, and I never intended for animal handling to be one of the topics of my research and extension, but it's become very fruitful. And the way that came about was by talking with Wisconsin dairy farmers. When I started my job, I asked them, what are your biggest challenges around animal care and animal welfare? And where can I help you by doing research and extension? And many farmers brought up that even though the principles around how we should be handling cows are well established, that there's sometimes this disconnect between knowing what you should be doing and then actually doing that on farms. So they wanted more or better training for people who worked on their farms. And it wasn't realistic for me as a researcher to go in person and do these trainings farm to farm. And so I had to think about ways to multiply my knowledge, as Dr. Fricke would say.
Right.
So it took me about a year of thinking on this problem, and then lightning struck because I'm not even really a video gamer in my personal life.
Right.
But I started thinking about how can we reach people in a way that's more interactive, because animal handling is something physical. You're almost doing a dance with the animal. You move, they move in response. How can we convey this in a way that helps people practice? Because there are a lot of really good videos that you can watch that demonstrate it, but even watching a well-produced video is passive learning. And we know from trends in the classroom that active learning is more effective, meaning you're engaged and taking more ownership of that learning process. And the idea partially came because my father-in-law, who's a Vanos, is a retired commercial airline pilot. And later in his career, he was switching to a new type of aircraft, and even a pilot of his seniority isn't allowed to just go right into the cockpit and fly. You have to go through the flight simulator. And I had gotten this idea, and I was thinking, I think the technology is here now. Maybe we can make some kind of flight simulator for handling dairy cattle. And I went to an ag expo actually in Finland, and I saw a kid sitting in a John Deere tractor simulator. So he was in a tractor seat with screens in front, screens behind, and he was doing a flight simulator in an agricultural setting. And so that confirmed to me that this is something that could be possible. So I started putting together a team of researchers and collaborators, interviewing potential programmers, and it was a multi-year process. But what I want to end with is saying that even though the idea was mine, that game was created with a lot of input from people in the Wisconsin dairy industry. So dairy farm owners, managers, employees, consultants, veterinarians, trainers. I don't think it's right to create educational tools for people who work on farms without their voices being included. Because even if as scientists or university researchers and extension specialists, we think we have good information, it can't just be this one-way process of disseminating information. We need to involve the end users to make sure those tools will resonate with them and be effective and relevant.
I think I looked at the little 3-minute thing, and there's people moving around, and it's very active. And so, so you've got an extension research appointment. How many people you got working for you?
Currently, I have 3 graduate students in my lab. We're a pretty
yeah.
small group, but actually we're a shared group of animal welfare researchers. There's 3 PIs, and so we often meet as a group to talk about animal welfare methods and these issues that work across different species. We can use the same kind of research techniques. And I have to
Yeah.
tell you, I came up with the acronym. I didn't use AI.
What?
It's Animal Welfare Science at UW-Madison. But if you look at our acronym, it looks like awesome.
Oh, yeah. I guess, yeah. So there's 3 animal welfare people?
Yes. So when I started, it was me.
Yeah.
And then we've hired 2 more. So my colleague, Dr. Sarah Adcock, she actually did her PhD also at UC Davis with Cassandra Tucker. We had a bit of overlap. But now she works less so on dairy cattle and more on sheep and poultry and actually insects that are used for animal feed. And then Dr. Ali Androkonis, she just started, but she works mainly on cats.
Cats? Mm-hmm. I didn't know that. Cats is that for my welfare? Because my cat drives me crazy. All right,
that's human-animal relationships is what you're looking for.
Oh, my gosh, a dang thing. Sheds all over me all spring, okay? That is stressful.
Yes,
the shedding.
Human-animal relationships, and we have that in dairy farming, too.
Yeah, well, so I learned, so you're an extension research, and I watched your video, and I learned that your motto is giving cows a voice through science.
Yes.
I thought that was really, really good. And I also learned kind of watching and listening a little bit. I know you're working on social housing of calves, and we're going to talk a lot about that. You mentioned cow-calf separation, and of course, I know you also mentioned that's not exactly my specific area of science. Been doing some work on heat stress abatement, and I read a few papers on feed bunks and feeding behaviors. Yeah, so, and then we've already talked about the cow handling. So I want to digress, okay? This is dairy digression.
Yes, okay. It's mandatory.
It's mandatory.
In the title.
It's in the title. So single housing, group housing versus pair housing. And you talked about cross-suckling in your video. People talk a lot about cross-suckling. And when I was milking cows at Cornell, I didn't milk at the University herd. It was a private herd, but 60 cow tie stall, and then we had a free stall. And what would happen was we'd milk the tie stall, kick the cows out, bring the free stall cows in, and we milk them. And I can't remember how it all worked, but they would shuffle places. And in front of the calves were tied in front of the cows along the wall. Okay, they were just tied along the wall. Not really tight.
From how old to how old?
Well, they were pre-weaned calves. They were tied along the wall. And all I remember for that is don't let the calves suckle each other because they'll calve in with a blind quarter. So we don't want that. Is that, and you were talking about suckling, is that the main reason we don't want them suckling one another? Okay, so we're talking about housing calves together. We got a lot to dissect here and digress on. But is that the main thing we're worried about, damage to the mammary gland, or were we worried about that it's just kind of an abnormal behavior? What is the concern?
You kind of answered it, actually, because I was just going to say that in terms of the cause and effect, I think it's an expression of, it is an abnormal behavior. When calves cross-suckle on each other, that's when one calf sucks on a body part of another. Intersucking is specifically when they suck on the udder or teats of another calf.
Yeah.
Cross-sucking, regardless of the body part, it's an abnormal behavior. So suckling is a natural behavior. It's instinctive, right? Okay. Cows are mammals. They evolved to drink milk as neonates.
Yeah.
It's a natural, what we call highly motivated behavior. It's intrinsic. So when a calf is born, they're looking for the source of their nutrition. Okay. They're going to suckle. So I want to just put that out there. We can come back to that. Cross-sucking is an abnormal manifestation of that. But then you're talking about the potential consequences.
Right.
There are very few papers that are able to make the explicit link between cross-sucking or intersucking behavior and downstream consequences. So naval infections are a potential consequence, and one paper found there was no consistent association between cross-sucking on the navel and naval infections. Other studies have tried to look at, is there an association between intersucking and later consequences for udder health or for somatic cell count.
Yeah.
And there is no definitive link, but there's very little research. And so this is part of what we want to look at. So I will also not digress, but just back up that
I don't know. That could be a digression.
No, this is a backup. So the reason I work on pair, group, or social housing of calves, again, is actually by popular request for information from Wisconsin dairy farmers. When I started asking them, well, what are you interested in? Many farmers said, hey, I've heard about this pair housing thing or group housing thing. They were aware that there had been research, but they wanted to have conversations. Well, why is it beneficial? Or, oh, I know it's beneficial, but I have these concerns. And cross-sucking or intra-sucking comes up, I think, the most often, either because it's the top concern or because they know what my background is in animal behavior.
Yeah.
But it does seem to be something producers worry about, and it is a barrier to farms either trying pair or group housing or sticking with it. So that being said, there are some solutions and lots of research during the pre-weaning period about what to do, but there's a lot less research in the post-weaning period. So that's where my lab is trying to go now, is to first try to document the progression of cross-sucking and intra-sucking post-weaning if calves were originally individually housed or pair housed in the pre-weaning period. And then later we want to try to look at potential interventions, but that would require funding to explore that later on. And so
I didn't know they did it in the post-weaning period.
Well, yes. And so a lot of producers, they individually house their calves pre-weaning, and then when they mix them after weaning, that's when they start to see the cross-sucking, because that's the first time the calves have the opportunity. And so sometimes it really is just a few culprits. It's not the entire herd. Yeah. But then they get afraid. Okay, I already see intra-sucking in the post-weaning period. I already have blind quarters. They're worried that if they pair house pre-weaning, that problem will get worse. And I hypothesize that that's not the case. It's not pair housing per se that causes the cross-sucking. Something else is causing it. It just gives calves the opportunity to show it, which they wouldn't be able to if they were isolated.
This is,
so we're trying to look into it.
This is great. This is a good discussion. I'm gonna help you out here with your research program.
You're gonna give me money, you mean?
No, I'm not gonna give you money. I was so curious about this cross-sucking thing. I did some research myself on it.
Did you do a lit review?
No, but I couldn't find anything on the topic except this 1939 paper. Okay.
Is it in English?
It's in English, and it's in the Journal of Dairy Science.
Oh my goodness!
By Sweat, Matthews, and Graves. Injury or infection in udders of heifers may terminate in blind quarters. And it's a whole treatise on cross-suckling and all this kind of anatomy and pictures.
What do you think of their methods? Is it good?
I don't know. I didn't have AI, so I didn't do it. Okay. So, but I'm going to send you this link.
Please do.
I'm going to send you this PDF, 1939 Journal of Dairy Science. Okay. It's got lots of pictures and hypotheses about damage caused by cross-suckling and everything else. And then, you know, the crazy thing? The same issue, 1939, December 1939. What is everybody talking about today, Jennifer? Other than, you know, cross-sucking and cows, they're talking about longevity and how long should cows live. 1939, expectation, title of the paper by Cannon and Hansen from Iowa State, Expectation of Life in Dairy Cows. Okay, 1939.
But how much milk were those cows producing at that time?
That's not part of the question.
Okay.
So and it is known, it is known, quoting, that replacement rates in dairy herds are rather high for investigators, show it necessary to replace approximately 21 to 28% of the herd annually. So they have all this summary on a lot of cows and a huge summary on data on cows in Iowa in 1939. What percentage of the herd in 1939 do you think was 10 years or older?
10 years or older.
10 in 1939. What percentage of, there's big numbers in this thing. What percentage of a dairy herd in 1939 was 10 years old or older?
Or older. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Was it in the double-digit percentages?
20%.
No way.
Yeah way.
Wow.
Okay. So this is the kind of information I've been, because I give lectures on dairy longevity, and I think that's fascinating.
That is fascinating.
Huge perspective. Then, okay, cows didn't make very much milk back then, but still.
Herd sizes were smaller. I mean, it was a different world.
But still, because we always argue about that. How old can cows get anyways? You know,
they can get. Yeah.
They can. And this has got the data. And so all this data on these cows, at this time, 1.1% of the cows were over 15 years old.
Wow.
but over 20% were, 20% of the herd was 10 years or older, which I think is really relevant to the discussions we're having now. Where do you fall on those discussions, Jennifer? So the discussion now, we have taken a significant digression.
This is a digression.
This is a significant digression.
I will confess I was not at the Discover conference on this topic. And I will equivocate a bit and say that I think that there are trade-offs, right? So I work on animal welfare, but I think that there are bigger picture ethical issues when we're talking about longevity, where I showed earlier the 2013 review in JDS that Nina von Kaiserlink and other authors wrote about sustainability of the dairy industry. And if we're thinking about our industry succeeding and thriving into the future, it's not just about profitability, because a lot of these questions about longevity are looking at trade-offs just within that sphere of what's the right number when we're thinking about how to maximize the productive life of the cow. But those other spheres look at environmental impact and then social issues like animal welfare. And animal welfare is just one ethical issue around the animal. So how long does the cow, quote, deserve to live? But when we think about this environmental impact story, I don't like the idea of waste, because that intersects with animal welfare and animal ethics, where for 2 years you have this future productive member of the herd who isn't producing anything yet and is just generating emissions and costs. And then if you're turning over quickly, then you're losing this productive life potential.
Right.
That even if I'm saying you, but people's minds, that we're always increasing this genetic potential, we should be bringing in this new and better, but that cow could potentially still be a productive citizen of the herd. And I think if we're thinking about the sustainability message and public legitimacy, public trust, it's hard to tell a good story if we're not keeping cows for as long as we could. Do you know what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying, and I totally understand what you're saying.
Because lay people love to ask me how long cows can live, because they know that horses can live to be, 20, 25, and that cows, biologically they potentially could do that. And there are herds even now where it's not 20% of cows who are 10 years and older, but they have a few. That potential is there. And I'm not saying you need to keep every single cow for every single reason, but I think if we're thinking about the long term, there's a lot of trade-offs between these priorities, and that if we want people to think of the dairy industry as being responsible for our animals and caring about our animals, we can't discard them like they're non-sentient widgets in a factory.
And I'm going to send you that paper as well.
Okay.
But back to, now we're going to de-digress. We're de-digressing.
Okay.
Back to cow-calf not cow-calf, social housing and pre-wean cows. So we're just going to dissect this, okay? So let's be real, right? In America, the tradition, and not sole tradition, but one tradition in America was the hutch.
Yes.
I have no clue when the hutch came on board, when the first hutch was built.
I can tell you what UW would say.
What?
When I started my job, I visited our heifer rearing facility at the Marshfield Agricultural Research Station, which is actually in Stratford, Wisconsin. But they gave me this printed book, The History of the Marshfield Agricultural Research Station, and they talked about the innovations by decade that came out of the research station. And it said 1960s, and they had a picture of the prototype calf hutches. They were wood. And so they claim that, these innovations came out of UW. Now, probably other people also invented the concept at the same time.
Okay, so the idea of a hutch, and so I teach, and of course I was born in 1960, okay, so no hutches when I was born, okay, nothing.
Yeah. Innovation in the 60s.
Yeah, okay, so I'm just saying, okay, and so I think the concept of the hutch was that, the modern day hutch is some sort of a plastic housing device.
Unless you live in California.
And it provides shelter, and there's a area in front that's fenced so that calf can come out, but every calf is housed individually. And I think the concept was, I think perhaps a lot of it was just preventing disease transfer between calves, and a lot of it was also a little bit maybe cross-cycling, but disease transfer. Okay.
Yes.
And so, but this has never been the only way to house calves. Now, if we go to, for example, New Zealand, Australia, pasture-based systems typically.
Yes, which I did do actually at the end of last year.
Big mobs just in a pen, mob feeders, mob everything. Okay, so that's always sat there off to the side.
Yes, different systems.
Different systems. And of course, now we know modern day, there's many farms that go for those. You had a word from social housing? Or
So
something?
I say social because that just means more than one calf. So the long-winded way would be pair or group. And I usually say that because if you say group, people picture these automatic milk feeding systems with 20 or more calves. But pair housing is also social housing.
So one option that farmers have, and they practice this in Wisconsin for sure, is put an automatic feeder in there. I don't know how many cows and heifers in the pen, but they all kind of live together and they get their little automatic feeder. So why, Jennifer, we have single housing, and why didn't you just say, why don't you just study the move from single housing to group housing? Why go to pairs?
Why pairs? There's a lot of reasons, but one that you alluded to is this original rationale for individual housing. And now I'll digress and have a caveat, which is a lot of the decisions we make in dairy farming that become a tradition are not arbitrary. There's a rationale behind it, and there's often these innovations and scientific research that evolves with the times, right? These papers we're talking about in 1939, dairy farming was a totally different universe than dairy farming in 2025. But the decision to move towards individual hutches was never arbitrary. It was out of concern for the calf and to try to protect calf health. But we're in a different world now. So individual housing is not the only way to achieve good calf health outcomes. Some people still find that there's advantages to individual housing that's more about individual monitoring. So you know how much you fed each calf. You know how much each calf consumed. So it's not just about monitoring for health.
Right.
But I think that there are ways that we can successfully raise calves in social groups, and many farms are doing it successfully. They're very passionate about it. So per your question about why pairs, I think that it's more feasible for smaller herds. They can't have big groups because they don't have enough heifers born close enough in time. Now, you mentioned Australia and New Zealand where they have seasonal calving, so they can have a big batch of calves born at the same time, even on a smaller herd. That's not necessarily the case here in the U.S. So if you're a smaller herd, you need to make sure those heifers are close enough in age, again, for concerns about disease risk and also competition for feed. Another reason is existing infrastructure. So if you have existing pens in a barn or existing hutches for one calf at a time, it can be easier to form small groups without completely tearing out your current housing system and starting fresh. And so I think it gives people flexibility to tiptoe in or to adapt their existing systems with less infrastructure investment.
Do you think...
And also manage disease risk because group size is a risk factor.
I teach freshmen, at the University of Missouri. I teach 5 weeks on dairy science, and I teach calves, and I teach paired housing, and I teach single housing. For my students, and I show a picture of calf ranch, nothing bad happening, just a calf ranch. Hundreds and hundreds of hutches in a row, And they don't like, my reaction is they don't like that.
The students are not receptive to seeing that.
Yeah. Do you think that's true for the general public, that if they saw a calf ranch, they would be like, what in the world's going on here? I mean, now when I show them 2 calves housed together, and of course I do the crazy thing, and I say, well, it's kind of like having a roommate, and everybody wants a roommate in college if they're a decent roommate, right? So is the general public reacting the same way to just this paired housing situation, or is it just not about the general public at all? It's more about the fact that if you've shown in your research that there are some benefits socializing the animal. So are we doing this for the public, or are we doing this for the future cow?
I'll answer that question first and then kind of work backwards to what you were asking about with the perception. I would say actually it's more for the animal, but when I present specifically on this topic, I kind of build the case because the reason that I'm advocating for this practice, and not saying every farm needs to do it immediately, but I try to provide that information to show what the benefits are. So I build up this list. We're not just talking about one benefit. The literature over the last 20 or more years, done in the US and Canada and Europe, has built this case that pair or group housing benefits the calves themselves in a number of different ways, and that there are win-wins from the farmer's perspective. And then public perception is something that's kind of like the cherry on top, and we can talk about, there's only 2 studies that I'm aware of that have looked at that. But for the calf themselves, cattle evolved as a herd species, so they are social creatures. And so there's lots of research that has shown that when calves are housed in pairs or groups from an early age, one of the biggest benefits we see is in terms of starter intake, and then that translates into weaning body weights and average daily gains. And there hasn't been a single study that has found that individually housed calves outperform the pair or group housed calves in terms of dry matter intake and growth. So some studies don't detect a difference. They perform similarly. A lot of studies detect a benefit of pair group housing. But again, no studies have ever found the reverse. And so a lot of farmers have kind of tiptoed into it by doing their own experiments to verify if they find those practical benefits in their own operation. So maybe they don't convert their entire calf pad over to pairs. They'll start with a row and they can measure if they see a difference. And a lot of them do. And that's what sells them on it, because that is a win-win. We know that early life starter intake and growth is really important. But then that's not the only benefit. And we don't have to go into all of those today. I will actually say on my website, I have a bunch of free resources that I developed in collaboration with other people who do research on dairy calves, whether they're veterinarians or animal welfare scientists like me, and there's some practical field experience. We walk through what's all the research, what are the benefits, and then what are these practical considerations, what housing type is right for you, what group size, what steps you need to take beforehand to assess calf health on your farm to know if you're ready to move into this, what do you need to think about in terms of cross-sucking and how you should be feeding your calves milk. So we have all those on there, and it's free for everybody.
At the University of Wisconsin.
Yes. So my website, the easiest way to remember it, it'll redirect you, is if you go to www.dairyanimalwelfare.org. So dairyanimalwelfare.org. It'll redirect you to my website.
I think, Jennifer, you bring up a good point, is that we have outstanding dairymen and dairy women, dairy people, and they are definitely not afraid if they have managed enough cows to, okay, Vanos told us to do this, I'll try it on 20 calves and see what I think, you know. And I got news for you, they don't adopt technologies that don't work.
Yes.
That's one thing I've learned about dairymen. They don't adopt technologies that don't work. And so sometimes I'll sit and I'll be listening to a presentation and stuff, and I know that technology's been around for 25 years. And I'm like, well, if it works so well, then how come no one does it? Okay. And we certainly, you see that in your work. We saw that with timed AI, you know, well, if it works, because they'll adopt it if it works, you know. And these dairymen are very...
See for their own eyes.
They see they want to see that, and they're not afraid to run small trials and, you know, and everything else.
Well, and I love that, because then they become passionate about it. And I think farmers like to listen to other farmers and not just us eggheads from the university, right? They can talk about their own experience. And then your other question about the consumer perception, I think that that's secondary. Really, I think we need to put the animal first and understand, doing animal welfare research and other types of animal science research, how are we actually benefiting the animal? How can the dairy operation benefit from that? And then does that actually help us in terms of this consumer trust? So there's only 2 studies I'm aware of. One is similar to the experience you described with the students. So University of Minnesota, they surveyed people and showed them images. It was within subjects design. So everybody saw the same 3 pictures in a randomized order of singly housed calf, pair housed calves, or calves in small groups. And they were asked to rate how much they approved of this and then provide some rationale for why. And in that study, they found that it was like less than half, I'm not going to remember the numbers off the top of my head, but something like a quarter of people approved of individual housing and half disapproved. But then the pattern was flipped for pair and group housing, where I think 3/4 of people approved of pair housing, 2/3 approved of pair housing, 3/4 approved of group housing. There's a lot more nuances in that paper. It was published in JDS. But then there was a later paper from Nina von Kaiserlink's group where they were actually more explicitly focused on the question of cow-calf separation. And there it was a between subjects design. So the different participants got different vignettes, no pictures, describing these scenarios of whether or not a calf was separated from the dam at birth. And then after she was separated, was she housed individually or in groups? There was a cross-fostering scenario with a nurse cow, and then there was a scenario where the calf was kept with her own dam. And in that case, they didn't replicate the Minnesota results. They found that people seemed to disapprove across the board, even of pair housing, knowing that the calf was separated from the dam. But again, that's only 2 papers, methodological differences, and I think it shows that we need to do more work to understand how different people perceive these practices and also how we pose the question. kind of affects the outcome. So I think both studies are really fascinating, but we need to take it with a grain of salt because it's just 2 studies.
I want to transition into another thing that I think a lot about, and that is tie stalls versus free stalls versus the future of dairy housing in general. But in terms of the future of housing, if I were to guess, I think the future housing probably involves free stalls, but with access to the outdoors. Cows like to, as you've known from your research, and I think it was Nina published a paper that if you open the back door of the free stall and it's a nice night, cows like to go outside and sleep out underneath.
Yes, to lie down.
They
have a few papers, yes.
Is that the future, or is it something totally radically different than that?
I mean, to be very honest, I'm a pragmatist. I don't think within the span of my career we're going to see something really radical, right? But we have already seen this industry shift where there's fewer tie stall dairies and more freestall dairies. But that's over a very long time scale. And so it used to be, right, if you looked at the NOMS data, the majority of cows were housed in free stalls, but the majority of farms were tie stalls because those were smaller farms. And now it's that the majority of farms and cows are in free stalls. I would be very surprised if in my career span we see some radical new housing system. There are more experimental systems or more like niche systems. I don't foresee that personally. Yeah. But what you just alluded to, I like those papers because to me that is giving cows a voice through science, right? We're not having this argument of tie stalls are better, free stalls are better, pasture is better. It's more about asking the animal, well, what do you think? And in those studies, and they found this more than once, cows used both types of environments at different times of day, depending on the weather conditions and for different purposes. And so what you just alluded to was that the cows are going outside to lie down at night because on pasture they can adopt different lying positions. It's a different comfort of the resting area. They weren't grazing because they were getting TMR inside. Yeah. And so I think that's why we have to do those studies. We can't just assume, the cows will definitely want pasture, right? They chose both. And so I like that idea of the choice. We call in animal welfare, we call that agency. So the animal is able to express their own preferences and their own opinions. And that sense of control and sense of ability to choose in and of itself can be good for welfare.
Well,
so these choice systems would be nice.
We have to wrap up.
Okay.
But I have other questions.
That'll be for a different day.
That'll be a different day. I mean, I read everything about animal sentience, and I read all the information about hooking up things to animals' brains to try to understand what do they understand, what do they react to, and all that kind of advanced neuroscience. But we're going to leave that for another day, okay? Because I would just love for you to be the first person to hook up some sort of a sensor onto a cow's brain and just ask the question, what do you think, ma'am? They have these sensors now for humans that have speech disabilities where they basically interrogate the brain and, you think it and the thing says it. I wonder what a cow would say.
They'd have to be non-invasive for me to feel comfortable doing that.
They're totally. Let's go there. Yeah. Okay, I'll look for that. All right.
Giving cows a voice through science, non-invasively. Yeah.
With a large kind of hat they have to wear, but you're gonna need long wires because they got to be able to walk around.
I don't know if that's non-invasive. Yeah, we got to think bigger.
Think bigger. Okay. So anyways, quickly, you're going to have to, you've been a fantastic guest and
thank you. It's
really, really fun. And okay, very, very, very quickly, Fricke gave you a lot of good career advice. Anybody else give you a lot of good career advice or say something that really made a difference?
I mean, it's like the Oscars, right? Where I have this long list of people to thank because it does take a village. And I've been very fortunate and very grateful for mentors, both official and unofficial, who guided me. I really could never have done this alone. Of course, I have to shout out my PhD mentor, Cassandra Tucker, my postdoc mentor, Nina von Kaiserlink, current people who I collaborate with and guide me, like Dr. Nigel Cook. I mean, I find these people really inspirational because not only are they rigorous scientists, but they see the practical application and the need to partner with farmers and also just very generous with their time. It gives me something to aspire to. And again, I have a whole list like a movie credits, right? People to thank. And so I apologize to anybody who I didn't shout out at this moment in time. But yes, so many people I'm grateful for in this community.
If you weren't a scientist, what would you be doing if you didn't do science? I can't imagine you not doing science because your description.
I didn't do science for 6 years after my undergrad. Yeah. But two things I thought of. One is I have periodic fantasies of being a national park ranger. My husband laughs at me because I don't like being hot and exposed to the environment. But I did that as a PhD student. I did research on heat stress. And I think when I'm really motivated, I can power through uncomfortable conditions because I love being out in nature and I really appreciate the natural resources we have in this country. Just spectacular mountains and weird rock formations and oceans. I love that. But also I think I would have wanted to develop my skills in graphic design more. So I used to do kind of layout just as a hobby in sort of like a journalism context. But now in our lab, we have so many students who are really, really talented at making infographic posters. And I really enjoy seeing them do that. And also I enjoy putting together presentations, but I would love to do that.
We're going to close, but I just want to tell you, Jennifer, this whole area that you work on, I think you call it, I can't remember, welfare. I get animal welfare.
Yes, animal welfare.
We just need the best of the best people working in this area because it's critical. It's so important, and
Glad you think so.
And we just can't, it has to be done at such a high level. It has to be
rigorous.
done at a very, very high level so that we can make progress. And, I'd watched a bunch of your videos and stuff, but I'd never met you really. And I just want to say that, we're very proud to have you in the dairy science community and very proud to have your work. You're certainly very deserving of promotion at one of the finest dairy science, the dairy science. I know it's dairy and animal science now, but at the University of Wisconsin, which is a fine institution and a fine dairy state. So congratulations, and thank you very much for your time.
I really appreciate that. It's been a pleasure.
All right, everybody, that brings us to the end of this episode of Dairy Digressions. Don't forget, if you enjoyed Dairy Digressions, please like and subscribe. And if you have feedback or suggestions for speakers, please tell us at adsa@adsa.org. This has been Matt Lucy, your host. Until next time, enjoy your science. Thank you very much. At Dairy Digressions, we talk to the people behind the latest discoveries in the dairy industry. If you would like to connect with those people, then the American Dairy Science Association is for you. ADSA is where researchers, educators, producers, and leaders in the dairy industry come together. Join us and become a member today at adsa.org.